This episode is brought to you by Blue Door Financial. Blue Door Financial will help you save money and reduce taxes to live a fuller financial life. To learn more, visit Blue Door Financial online at BLUdoorfinancial.com. That's BLUdoorfinancial.com. Hi, I'm Bill Corcoran Jr., and I'm your host for the On the Stacks podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Frank Bartoli, founder and CEO of NEPA Inclusive. What's up, podcast episode 89 of the On the Stacks podcast in the Blue Door studio. Welcome to the show, Frank. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you know what? I have to say, I'm a little disappointed. I thought maybe, I saw you stomping a bunch of grapes recently, and I was hoping you'd bring me some of that wine.
I was sitting out there and I was thinking, you know what? I just bottled 3 bottles 2 nights ago, but it's really early in the season.
Okay.
So you could drink it. And then I thought to myself, I should have brought a couple bottles. I did think that.
But you did redeem yourself with these shirts.
They're cool shirts.
They are cool shirts.
Because inclusion is cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. And but they're gold metallic on a black shirt, and so thanks for the shirt.
You're welcome.
And again, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you. You actually were for those that don't know, on the Stacks probably like a year and a half ago, right before the podcast started. You were on the Stacks, but then the podcast didn't exist. So now you're here and you're on the show. So
it was fun to be on the Stacks, and I thought that's what it was, and then now I'm here on the Stacks again.
So you're a returning member.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm a veteran.
You are. Yeah, you are. Yeah. I mean, we got matching jeans and boots. Now we're like the coolest.
I even learned how to roll my jeans up now.
You did. I taught you.
You're a good mentor for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you learned something today. But so let's kind of jump into it. We're going to talk about NEPA Inclusive quite a bit. But before we do, you have a really extensive background in nonprofit and fundraising. Where did it all start for you?
Well, it started when I went to college, and I thought I wanted to be a physical education teacher, and I didn't do so well in some of the classes like kinesiology and physiology, and I was working at the YMCA in Lock Haven, and I thought this would be a great career. So I started working part-time at the YMCA there in Lock Haven, and when I came home for the summers, I did my internship at the wilkes-barre Y with Jimmy Thomas, and it just was something I did, and I stuck with it. So I got a degree in recreation management, and started my career at the CYC in Wilkes-Barre after the internship at the YMCA in Wilkes-Barre. Then I went to a community recreation position in Muhlenberg Township outside of Reading, and then a year later went to the YMCA in Philadelphia called the Upper Darby, the Community YMCA of Eastern Delaware County in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania.
Well, that was a mouthful.
Yeah, so that's why I got a little tongue-tied there. From there, I went to the Ambler YMCA as the associate director, and then my hometown Y, the Pitston, Greater Pitston YMCA, opened up for the CEO position, so I applied and moved back home, took over the Y, and ran that for 8 years.
Yeah. So that was it. Is that what brought you back to the area?
That's what brought me back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're from Pitston?
I'm from Pitston, born and raised. Went to Pitston High. Yeah.
All around Pitston guy.
Yeah.
Wine guy.
Well, yeah. We're Italian from Pitston. We like our wine.
Yeah.
Red wine.
Yeah. Of course.
Red wine.
Yeah. What kind? What's your specialty?
Well, I'll tell you, I've got Zinfandel going in 2 different batches this year, and also I added a Sangiovese, which I really like Sangiovese, and so 2 years ago I did Sangiovese, and I didn't last year, I believe, and I kind of regretted it, so I got some Sangiovese again this year. Okay.
No others?
No. Well, I did a white I have an interesting story about the white that I had, and it's a Moscato, and if you do the homemaking wine, you could, to simulate wine being made in barrels, you could, in your glass or plastic barrel, you can put a stick of oak, and that then gives it the oaky flavor. So I put that into my Moscato last year, and when I went to then try it, I thought it was ready, it was some of the most worst tasting wine I've ever tasted.
So it was a flop.
And it was a flop. So I was like, I don't know, I got to dump this out. So I left it there for like 9 months because I was just too lazy to dump it out. And when this season then came about, I had to clean out my barrels and get ready. And I was like, well, let's try it before I dump it out. And it tasted fine. So over that course of 9 months, it just kind of worked itself out of the oaky flavor, and then it was fine. So now I have some bottles left of the Moscato from last year.
So it all worked out.
All worked out.
But the red is where it's at.
The red is where it's at because the red you could drink early, and you could drink it late, and in between. It's for me anyway, and I think a lot of people around here like the red.
I love it. Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit about your days at the Pitston YMCA. Like, what did you do there? What did you accomplish there?
Well, the Pitston Y, when I took it over as the CEO, had a long history. It was an historic YMCA built in, I think it was 1893, and it burned down in 79, and they rebuilt it in 83, and a couple months after they opened the doors, they notified the banks they couldn't pay the loan on the $1 million that they had borrowed. And for 20 years, it went through debt. They weren't paying on their debt for many years and things of that nature. So when I took it over, they still owed $400,000 on the debt from 25 years ago, and it was in really bad shape. But it had a community that really wanted the Y to succeed, and so my task was to try to find a way to take this YMCA out of almost going bankrupt because the bank wanted the note paid and we didn't have the money to pay the note, and 20 years of deferred maintenance, and had to work with the community leaders and the board and the members to try to find a way to get that YMCA back to where it needed to be. And in fact, I remember I told my wife at the time, my ex-wife now, maybe a month or two after I took the job, I said, I think we're going back to Philadelphia. Because I had been with the YMCA Philadelphia at the time. And the YMCA Philadelphia is a very large organization. And I was at the largest branch in Philadelphia called the Ambler Area YMCA as the assistant director. And I was like, I think we're going back to Philly. I don't think this is going to happen.
You didn't think it was going to
I
work
don't think
out.
it's going to work. But, through some creative movement on the loan issue, I was able to buy out the loan at a much lower cost and put it back over a 15 or 20-year term. We got the Keystone Job Corps to come down and help us with some renovations. And I think that was back in the day, it was a Senator Musto influence. Some of the board members, I think, had some influence with asking Senator Musto to help us. Now, if you know about the Job Corps up in Red Rock, outside of Dallas there, they're a training facility for adjudicated youth, basically. And so they would bring down buses of these students, and they helped us renovate racquetball courts into a fitness center at the time. And I can remember when they would, then all the people in Pitston were kind of like, they felt uncomfortable at first about these adjudicated youth coming down in buses. But I think it was good for the community because they realized that they were actually doing good work, and they were, very positive people, and, it was a great situation. So, after 8 years, I had left, but in that 8-year time, we went through some different phases, and one of those phases was paying off the debt and remortgaging it. One was renovating the fitness center, which they didn't really have a nice fitness center at the time, and now they had a state-of-the-art, one of the best fitness centers in the region. Went through making the Y profitable, and then minimum wage increased from $5.15 to $7.15, and then we were not profitable. So we had to go through that process of how do you then reorganize that. And then went into a capital campaign at the end of my time there, and I left right before the capital campaign raised about $1 million to renovate the Y. So, that's the long and short of it.
Yeah, wow. That's a lot.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wore me out.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the YMCA, fundamentally in my career, I had been at a number of YMCAs, 3. And, I realize now in my role with NEPA Inclusive that I got the best training in the YMCA network to be successful in starting and doing another nonprofit now.
So what made you start NEPA Inclusive?
Well, I have a daughter with Down syndrome, and she was born in Philadelphia region. I lived in Broomall and Delaware County 2 different times in my adult life. And the first time when we moved down to take the job at the Community YMCA of Eastern Delaware County.
Another mouthful.
Got it right. she was born at Brentmore Hospital, and about half an hour after she was born, you say you like stories, so here's kind of the short end of Ellie's story. We had bought a house knowing that the due date for Ellie was when it was. And we were moving into the house 2 weeks before Ellie was going to be born on the due date. And I was a young person. I was foolish, and I had no idea that this isn't how things work in life. And so 3.5 weeks before we moved, before her due date, we went to the hospital and found out that, my wife was in labor. And we're like, well, now we're at the hospital and they're telling us that we're going to have the baby today. It's like 3.5 weeks and all these things. And they start losing her heartbeat. And they rushed her into emergency C-section surgery. And so I'm sitting there. I have to go back and think about how old I was, 25, 27, something like that. And I'm going through all this. My God, we might lose the baby. And then they came out and they said, she's fine. The baby was born. We were able to, and everything's good. And so I was like, wow, now I go through this high of, I went through a downer and then I went to a high. And a half hour later, they came out and they said, well, we believe that she has Down syndrome. And we were like, what's Down syndrome? Like, we didn't know. I read about it in a textbook once in college, but that's all I knew about it.
But at the time, you didn't understand?
No. And so then they explained to us what it was. And, of course, there was all those emotions. Now there was all those negative emotions. About 2 days later in the stay at the hospital, I'm thinking, well, how am I going to move into this house? She's in the hospital. She was 3.5 weeks early. The baby Ellie has Down syndrome. And I got all these things going on. And we get a knock on the door in the hospital. And it's these two women. And I remember Carrie Weimer. And I feel bad that I don't remember the name of the other woman because I could picture her. But they said, oh, hi, we're here with the local Down syndrome welcoming group. Welcome to the family of Down syndrome. And I don't remember what they said, but we looked at each other like, who are these people? And
why are they doing this? Yeah.
Yeah. Then they're like, oh, believe me, Frank, it's not going to be as bad as you think. You're going to find that this is going to be a wonderful thing. And we were like, what are you talking about? We're going through all these emotions. And I talk to this Carrie Weimer every now and then, and we message on Facebook now. That's how you do it, And I always say to her, I can remember distinctively that moment where you said to us, it's going to be okay. And us thinking, there's no way this is going to be okay. And now I see why she told us that, because it really is going to be okay. It's really fine. So that was kind of our introduction to having a child with a disability. And then we went through, just years of learning about disabilities. And at one point, then my daughter became, of age. She started getting older. She was in high school. And I was fortunate that I was able to get a job after I left the YMCA. I did a couple of things in between, but I found myself then as the executive director of the ARC of Delaware County. Back into Delaware County, I'm working. My family was up here. I was working in that area, and I was the executive director of an advocacy group, one of the largest networked advocacy group for people with intellectual disabilities in the country. And this was a small chapter of that national organization in Delaware County, and learned a lot about inclusion. Early in Ellie's life, I can distinctly remember going to the Down syndrome interest group of Delaware County's meetings and having a woman talk about why it's important to be included in classes in high school if you're a person with a disability. And I learned a lot of things about inclusion from organizations in the Philadelphia area, vision for equality, two women that started an advocacy organization there, Values into Action, and Marion Salino in Media, Pennsylvania. There's a group out of there that I learned from, Community Integrated Services that do employment, inclusive employment. And so I learned those things, and I realized that I was going to move back to this area because my family was still here. I was divorced, but I wanted to move back to be a dad and come back and spend more time with my kids. I realized that those inclusionary programs were really not being offered here. And so what I thought was, well, I really have, a decision to make in terms of, how do I see my daughter's life evolving when she gets out of high school in a couple of years? And am I going to be satisfied with the offerings that are being offered in the disability community here at the time as I saw it? And I'm sure there were some inclusionary programs here that I maybe wasn't aware of or didn't think were really as inclusive. So it's hard to talk about these things and have people not say, well, wait a minute.
What about us? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you just didn't know.
But so I decided that after talking to some friends and colleagues that I would start NEPA Inclusive. And so we got together with some people, some friends, and the idea was very simple, was if I can plan a platform of supports for my daughter, and I could be successful at an inclusionary platform of supports, then there must be other people like my daughter out there that are not receiving those same inclusionary supports. And maybe we can do this for a group of people that would want that. And if we can do that and be successful, then at a minimum, if I never made a dime on a salary out of NEPA Inclusive, at a minimum, I would have given my daughter an opportunity to have an inclusive life. And if I could do that for her and I could do that for a handful of people, I could walk away and say, if I have to go back and be a director of another Y or fundraise or grant rate somewhere else, and then I would have considered that a success. And what we found was the more we talked about inclusion and how we can do it, the more people listened and the more people wanted it. And, so fundamentally why I did it was for my daughter and for people that wanted to have a life like my daughter wanted to have. And
what type of life did you want her to have?
Well, I wanted to have the same life that you have. I mean, that's the basis, right? So what people don't understand about inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities, we're talking about people that in the general community people would see go to a day program or a group home. Intellectually disabled, they get they can qualify for what's called the Intellectual Disability Waiver. It's guaranteed, federally funded. What it means is the federal government has said, and they give money to the states, and the states have said, we have to take care of the intellectually disabled. People with an IQ under 70 with 2 learning delays diagnosed prior to the age of 18 is a general term. These are the students in high schools and in elementary schools that get in IEPs, individual education programs.
Another tongue twister there.
Yeah, there's a lot of these in the field.
Yeah.
So when they age out of high school, quote unquote, and when they get out of high school and graduate or leave high school, then they qualify for funding. And the funding is, you can get day services in a day program, or you could get living services in a group home, or you could go to a sheltered workshop now called pre-vocational centers. And, the system had been designed around what's called a medical model of supports. And we're talking 50 years ago. And so 50 years ago, the community got together and said, oh, well, people have a disability, an intellectual disability. They have a problem. They have to go somewhere. So let's open up the Whitehaven Center and have a state-run institution. And then they said, well, that's not good enough. We want to keep our kids in our own communities. Okay, great. So let's open up group homes and let's open up day programs. So you have a problem. You have a disability. You need treatment. You need to go somewhere. Well, I'm an alternate thinking person, and I think, well, I really should come to you. You live in Duryea, my daughter does. I should be able to go to your house. I should be able to say to you, what do you want your life to look like? Let's plan out and let's support you to have that life. And so when you ask what are those services, we support well over 100 people every year. People will ask me, well, how many centers do you have? And I'll say, well, I have 100. Wow, you must be like a couple. You must be like huge. I'm like, no, I have 100 people, so I have 100 programs. An individual program for every single person. To me, it's a very simple concept. My daughter wants to be a photographer. We help her be a photographer. She wants to go and walk to lose weight last year, so she goes to the parks and she walks. We have people from all different types of ideas of what they want to do in their life, and we just help support them to do that. And we do that very simply through a billable service model, one-on-one. And so what that means, instead of that same person that gets that waiver, instead of that person going to a group home and doing things the same as everybody else, We simply just send a one-on-one person to their house, take them out to the community to do what they want to do. Grocery shopping, doctor's appointments, recreational programs, build friends, teach daily living skills, teach you to be a photographer. Now, we don't necessarily teach people to be all those things, but we might find a place that could teach you how to be a photographer, and then we take you there. And they teach you, and then we take you home. So, when people ask, like, well, the question I think you asked was like what kind of a life? The same life that you want to have. And that's what people don't realize about people with intellectual disabilities. And I don't mean everybody, because there's a lot of people that do understand this. But generally speaking, we don't really give enough value to the idea that a person with an intellectual disability has their own wants and desires. And our role shouldn't be to tell them where to go. Our role should be to ask them, what do you want, and how do I help you get that? So if you ask me, what do? We don't do anything the same twice, because nobody is the same as the next person.
Wow, that is really awesome. So can you give me maybe some more examples of some other people that you guys have helped?
So I'll tell you about Jeremy. Jeremy was one of our first people that we supported, and he lived in a group home, and he wanted a job. Jeremy worked in supermarkets in Florida many years ago. When his father passed away, he moved with his mother back here to this area, and his mother put him in what was called at the time United Rehabilitation Services. It was a sheltered workshop, an employment location day program. He continued to tell people, I want to work. I want a job in the community. And after a few years of being in the workshop, he never had an opportunity to go out in the community and get a job. He enrolled, I guess his mother enrolled him in a program called TRACE, which was run by the local ARC at the time. And it was a 2-year employment training program to teach him how to work in the community. Now remember, Jeremy worked in supermarkets in his previous life, right, before he moved back here. So we were asked, because in the ARC were not successful in getting him a job in the community after the 2-year training program had ended. And so we were asked to help Jeremy get a job. And so guess where we got Jeremy a job?
Supermarket.
Bingo, winner. Do we have a prize for Bill? I mean, that's, it wasn't, and it wasn't that simple to get him a job in a supermarket, but it was that simple to get him a job in a supermarket. So I have a friend, her name is Kathy Carey, and her brother owns Tipsy Turtle Restaurants. And so I called her one day and I said, hey, Kathy, your brother has some jobs open. I see, do you think you can talk to him for me? And maybe they can hire Jeremy, because even though it's not a supermarket, Jeremy said, well, I'll work in food service too. I'll be a dishwasher, which will be fine. So she said, listen, I talked to my brother. Go see him up at, on Sunday, he'll be at the Tipsy Turtle airport location. Go up there and talk to him. So I went up there with my son, and we watched the Steelers game. My son was a Steelers fan. And we're eating something and, watching the game, and I see her brother come by. So I walk over and I talk to him, and I said, hey, look, this is Frank Bartoli. Kathy said, he goes, oh, yeah, I talked to Kathy. He goes, well, so we talked a little bit about what, and he said, look, Frank, he said, I don't have a job like that here. My servers do the dishes, and so we don't really have a dishwasher job. But my brother is here, and he's sitting here with his family watching the game, having lunch. So let me introduce you to him. So he brings me down and he introduces me to his brother, Dave Carey. And so I talked to Dave then, and Dave is a manager of a supermarket. And he says, give me a call Monday, give me a call tomorrow, and we'll interview him, we'll see. Called him Monday, brought him down, he interviewed him, he hired him. He worked there for a couple years in a supermarket. Then he decided to move back to Florida to live with his brother, so that's where he is now. But that's kind of the example of what we're talking about. Another example would be Roxy. So Roxy, her mother called me. This is a great story, actually. So Roxy, her mother called me, and she says, look, Frank, she says, the county, was talking about having my daughter go live in a group home, and I don't want that. She lives in her own apartment, and I heard that you can help her stay in her own apartment. Can you help her do that? And I said, sure. And, I'm a little bit wiser now, because I was, I'll solve this problem.
You'll fix this, yeah.
And it's rarely that simple to fix. But so I called what's called the supports coordinator, and she's like, listen, you I don't know, the whole story here, and I don't really want to go on the specifics on this particular scenario, but so I got involved and kind of got into a mediation discussion with the supports coordinator in the county and the family and the mother, and I said, listen, I mean, if we're going to do this, and Roxy had been having problems remaining in her own apartment because her mother was having problems with keeping her there. There were some issues with firing providers and finances and things of that nature, but so I got involved and I said, listen, give us a shot at doing this, and maybe we can solve this, because Roxy's telling us that she wants to stay in an apartment. She doesn't want to go in a group home. And that's the other thing about people with intellectual disabilities. They should be able to decide where they live, who they live with, and how they live. And we as a society should not dictate where they live. We should provide support services to see that they could be successful in those living arrangements. But if she specifically says, I don't want to live in a group home, we shouldn't force her to do that. And that's kind of what it revolved around. So the negotiation was I would have an opportunity to help her. And, if it didn't work, then she may go live in a group home. I mean, at some point, that would be. So we started with then providing 24/7 care to Roxy. And so we were there 24/7 around the clock, 365 days a year, helping to support her in her own apartment. And today, 4 years later, we only provide 16 hours of support a week to Roxy. She lives in her own apartment independently with some limited supports, only 16 hours a week. She's an artist. She's an excellent artist, actually. She's a good painter. She makes a lot of good creative artworks. And, we'd like to promote an opportunity for her to sell some of her artwork if she wants to, but that I gotta be up to her. But so there's a couple different kind of scenarios where you can kind of understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So you talk about these families, like that one, for example, you said her mother called you, right? Mm-hmm. Do these people, the families, do they find you? Like how do you find these families that need this type of help?
So there's a couple different ways that this happens. And before people know about you and before you make a name for yourself, you have to rely on the system to give you referrals. And so we operate in two different services. We operate in the community living support services with the ID waiver. It gets confusing, and that could include employment, but that we also operate with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. These are two state organizations funded by the federal government with a state match, but the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation does mostly the employment side. And so they may offer somebody an opportunity with an intellectual disability to get a job, and they would give them a contract and say, look, you can get a job, right? Like, we'll help you as a state agency, and you can pick a local provider to do this. The Office of Vocational Rehabilitation only has to give 3 options to that person. Now, we may not be one of the options for them. So if nobody knows about us, we're not going to be on that list. But a family can request us, and you always have provider of choice, both in the OVR, Office of Vocational Rehabilitation side. You can say, I'd like them. On the ID waiver side, with what's called a supports coordinator, you can request this as well. So how it works is, in the beginning, you need to get referrals. And even today, you need to get referrals, because most of the referrals are going to come through an OVR counselor or a support coordinator. So you have to make those relationships, and you have to make yourself known. You have to make people understand who you are and what you do, and carve out your market of services that, because an OVR counselor might say, listen, I know about 15 or 20 different providers, but I know this one would meet your needs. I may not meet the needs of somebody else. In the ID waiver system, might be the same thing. If that person wants to go live in a group home, I'm not gonna come up as an option for that family with a supports coordinator, because the supports coordinator knows I don't operate group homes. Once you get your name out there and people know NEPA Inclusive and what you do, they can request you. And so you might go to your meeting as a family, and the OVR counselor or the supports coordinator at the county might say, well, we think you should use this company. And you can say, I want NEPA Inclusive. And then they have to give us that referral because it's provider of choice.
So what type of funding is needed for you guys to sustain the model that you have? Like, how does it work?
How it works, on two sides, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation has money from the federal government for the United States Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Their whole goal in the United States is to help people with disabilities get into the workforce or get back into the workforce. So traditionally, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation would have worked on things like, well, like I work and I get hurt and I take 6 months off, I'm on disability, and I get rehabbed and now I want to get back in the workforce. That's typically how OVR had worked in the past. I want to get back into the workforce, and now they help me do that. On the ID waiver side, it's federally funded to the states. The states then manage the intellectual disability waiver. It's actually now called the Intellectual and Developmental Disability Waiver. You can have an ID diagnosis, as we've talked about, or an autism diagnosis and qualify for that. And so that level of care, the state says we have to care for the people that have intellectual disabilities, so we give them support services. Ask me the question again, because I'm losing the
funding.
The funding.
How is all the programs funded?
So the federal government takes the tax dollars, gives it to the state matches it, and don't ask me exactly how they match it, 2 to 1 or whatever, and then they have that money available. So in the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation employment side, they have money available to help people find jobs and get into jobs and get back into the workforce. OVR then says, we have a contract for you. We'll give you a contract to help your daughter, Ellie, 23 years old, find a job. And we want you to help her find a job and then job coach her until she's successful on the job. It used to be up to 90 days. Now it's 5 phases. It could be 90 days. It could be a little bit longer than 90 days. But then they give us amount of money to do that, right? So they give us a contract. And it basically breaks down to an average hourly rate. We take that average hourly rate and we pay our staff less than what the state gives us because we have to pay payroll taxes and liability insurance, and we pay our staff to go do that work. On the ID waiver side, it's the same concept. The services that we offer are one-on-one, quarter-hour billable services. So if I help you live in your own apartment for 15 hours a week, the state pays me on a quarter-hour basis for 15 hours a week to support that person living in their own apartment, 15 hours a week, one-on-one support. I get to bill an hour, I pay a staff an hour, and I have to take enough money out of that markup that I can run the administrative arm of the company. So it's state-funded, federally funded, state-funded services that we operate out of. 90%, 95% of our business. We do some other things, and we're going to start branching out into doing some more other things. But how it works is the government has money to support the people that we support finding and staying on jobs and living in the community.
So you don't really rely on like traditional fundraising?
We do not. We do some fundraising, like everybody does. We are a 501c3 charity. We relieve the burden of government as a 501c3 charity, and we do some other things that are unique, but most of our business is billable services.
Okay. So what about, let's talk about, I mean, have you, or did you have any challenges, raising Ellie, as a young parent, with an intellectual disability? I mean, were there any challenges that you guys faced?
Well, there are the same challenges that other families face, and then there are the disability challenges. And then there are different varying levels of disability challenges. So I've always felt myself very fortunate because my daughter doesn't have any specific medical needs that prevent her from going to school and prevent her from being in the community and doing general activities. She's not been sick. She doesn't have any physical disabilities that prevent her from playing basketball like she enjoys to do, things of that nature. But the number one thing that happens with families that have children with disabilities is the income gap. And what I mean by that is I was a Y guy, as we talked about. My wife at the time was a CFO of a publicly held company in the Philadelphia region. Well, who do you think was bringing home the bacon? It wasn't me, right? Okay. So my daughter's born, she has Down syndrome, and my wife takes 3 months off to do that whole maternity thing and have a daughter that's 3 months old, and now she may be able to go to daycare, and My wife says, I'm not going to work full time. I can only work part time. And I'm like, what? Like, how are we going to do this? But, it became clear that she said, listen, I can't work full time and raise a child with a disability. I mean, it's just not something that I can do. And what I've learned over the years is, typically speaking, a majority of families, if not a significant majority of families that have children with disabilities, cannot work the same as families without children with disabilities. And so they make significantly less income in their life than another family would make. And moving past the youth side of my daughter, people that have adult children with intellectual disabilities still have a level of care for their adult children with disabilities. I know a family up in our region that I've had conversations with. They're almost at retirement age. They have an adult child that's probably in his 40s or 50s now, or approaching that, and they're like, look, I mean, we have to at some point have him live someplace else and not in our own house because we're just not going to be here. So the financial strain that a family with a child with a disability has, and then just the long-term care. Like people can't go and do the same things recreation-wise, typically speaking, that other people can do because they have a dependent care of an adult child with an intellectual disability. And if you're a person that doesn't, want your child with disability to go live in a group home or go live in a state institution or go live in somebody else's house, and you really, and I'm not making judgments here, but there are people that say, look, I mean, my daughter is going to stay with me. Well, there's a stress and a financial strain that comes along with that. Now, in my daughter's case, she was fully included in her high school classes. She, was in the basketball program. She's now, trying to be an aspiring photographer, and she works at a bakery, and she's a joker. She volunteers with the Wilkes-Barre Chamber of Commerce at their events and things of that nature. She volunteers for Meals on Wheels to help do meal preparation every Saturday. But there's so many families that have children that maybe they're wheelchair bound, maybe they're nonverbal, maybe they have autism and cerebral palsy, or dual diagnosis, and aren't as mobile and able. I mean, those families really have a very difficult time. But here's another misnomer, and this is one of the things that really probably drive me more than my daughter, is the idea that that person that's nonverbal, or that person that may be dually diagnosed, and maybe can't speak as ably as somebody else can, and maybe has behavior challenges. The idea that that person shouldn't be able to choose, that they should be able to live where they want to live or do the things that they want to live. Because people look over that and they think, oh, well, that person can't. They can't even tell me what they want. It doesn't mean they don't have feelings. It doesn't mean that they don't have wants and desires. You just have to figure out what they are, and then support them in achieving their goals. Because there's no reason why that person should, I mean, I saw a movie recently where the person goes in for surgery and, he goes under with anesthetics, but he's still awake, right? And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, essentially what you're saying is the person that's nonverbal with an intellectual disability is not being listened to live the life that they want, so they're being forced to do something that they don't want to do. So I think it's our job, I mean, as providers, but as people, as a society, to say, like, what is the life that you want to live? And can I help you achieve that life? And not tell people what they want, not assume what they want, because what they say when you assume, right? You make an ass out of you and me, right?
Absolutely.
You said I could curse.
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
So
yeah, go ahead.
right?
Yeah.
But, and I think that's the thing is, for me is, I'm fortunate in the sense that if you ask my daughter, what do you want? She's going to tell you. But I know many people that they can't tell you what they want. But you can find it out, flashcards. You can learn their idiosyncrasies. You can get to know them. You can spend time understanding who they are and what they want and help them achieve those goals.
What are some of your favorite memories with Ellie?
Put me on the spot. Some of my favorite memories with Ellie. I think the thing that strikes me the most about Ellie right now is the fact that when I was the YMCA executive director in Pitston, everybody knew who I was. It's Frank Bartoli. He's the Y director. Do you know what people call me now?
Ellie's dad.
Ellie's dad. That's it, right? So I like Ellie's dad. So, I mean, I think if you ask me now, like, what do I don't really know what my fondest memories are. I'd have to go back and think about them. There's so many of them. But, you know, her wit is one of the things that I think attract people to her. But Ellie's very well liked. I think more liked than I am or ever was or ever will be. But for some reason, Ellie just has this way about her that she's witty and funny, and people like that. So I think some of my fondest memories have to be around just the way that we joked with each other, and, you know, her wit about things that she'll say to me is, you know, phenomenal. But I'm very proud of Ellie. I mean, Ellie always wanted to play basketball, but she really couldn't play competitive basketball because she really couldn't physically, as an athlete, compete in a basketball arena where, you know, it's one thing if, you know, I was a runner in high school. So like if I run and I have the best time, I have the best. If you're playing basketball, you have to play offense and defense, right? So you just couldn't make that transition. So she was the manager of the high school girls basketball team at Pitston area for many years. And here's one of my fondest memories of my daughter. And it's really not fun, but it's one that struck me the most is people will think, oh, you're the inclusion guy. You're Frank. You're running NEPA Inclusive. You must know everything about disabilities. Yeah, guess what? I didn't even know anything about my own daughter, right? So she's volunteering to be the basketball manager at the high school basketball team. Coach Healy, she was fantastic. And I had to pick her up one day from practice and take her home. So I show up, and you walk into the gym, and they're still practicing. And so you just stand there, and you kind of watch for a while until they're done. And I think I had about 10 minutes before I thought it was going to be over. And I'm standing there, and I'm watching my daughter do the clock while the team has an inner scrimmage at practice. And I had no idea she could do that. No idea. I was like, I can't believe my daughter is doing the clock, stopping it, starting it, doing the score. She's running the scoreboard at practice. And I'm like, I didn't know she could do that. I was dumbfounded with the idea that she could do it, but also that I didn't know she could do it. And it's not that I thought she couldn't do it. It just never dawned on me that like she would be running the clock at a basketball game. So then they invited her to play in a basketball game. I don't know if you remember this story.
I do, yeah. Well, kind of, yeah.
I thought, okay.
We got the picture here with us.
Right, there it is. So I'm like, you know, I thought, okay, and I hate to be negative about this, but I thought, okay, this is going to be like these videos you see on TV where they're going to put her in, she's going to go, she's going to score a basket, we're all going to cheer, and she's going to sit down, and it's going to be blah. Man, they let her play for like a few minutes, and she scored like 10 points. And I was like, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah, so she actually played.
She actually played. Now, I think they didn't really play defense against her.
Sure.
Right? But
they played.
But they played. And she like ran up and down the court. And if you see this isn't the picture, but I'll show you the other picture. If you see the picture of her when she's got this face on like, oh my God, I scored, and her teammates were in the background jumping. Have you seen that picture?
Yeah.
And it's like the best picture I ever could remember for my daughter because I could see the players and the coach, the absolute joy in their faces. You can't fake that. Now you could jump up, you can clap, you could do whatever, but when you see that picture, it's like they were really so happy for Ellie, and I mean, it was amazing. Then they asked her to play in the All-Star game, and she played in the All-Star game. And then we get a call one day that she was selected to the homecoming court. And I was like, wow, so she's going to be on the homecoming court, you know, and there were people like Taryn Ashby and Mia Barberi. These are not just Pitston people, right? But these are athletes, you know, popular people, wonderful families, well-known. And I'm thinking, wow, like this is great. It's such an honor that they selected my daughter to be on the homecoming court. And then they selected her as homecoming queen. And I was like, my God, this is amazing. Like I had never thought like this would happen. So now Ellie's the homecoming queen. And I thought, you know, I mean, it could have been Mia Barberi. It could have been Taryn Ashby. I'm sorry I don't remember the other people's names, but then I realized like these people that could have been homecoming queen did this for my daughter because they knew what impact it would have on my daughter's life. That's the kind of people that you have in Pitston. They're just amazing. So, I mean, there's some of the memories that I had on Ellie. And unfortunately, now that she's had those, she never lets me forget them.
Well, she's way cooler than you.
Way cooler.
So kind of going back to, like when you said that you started NEPA Inclusive, one of the things that you said earlier was like you weren't sure, and you said even if it wasn't going to be successful, at least you provided the life that your daughter wanted to have, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why do you think, I mean, you said now you guys support about 100 people. Why do you think it was so successful?
Well, I probably shouldn't give away my secret.
Okay, yeah, don't do that.
Right.
But
I'll give away my secret.
All right, go ahead.
And here's the secret. And if anybody ever wants to know how to be successful in this business, I think there's probably two fundamental ideas. And one is put people first over agency. Secondly is talk about people. Don't talk about agency. That's the whole key to my success. Because I don't care if the company folds tomorrow. I can go do something else. I made these people live the life that they want to live. It's all about the people. It's not about me. It's not about the agency. It's not about our budget. It's not about give us money so we can keep the doors open. The only thing it's really about is getting Jeremy the job that he wants. The only thing it's really about is if my daughter could be a photographer. That's all it's about. I don't care how much money the government pays me for it. I'll do it with whatever the government gives me. But that's what I think separates us from other providers. And I don't want to call it other providers here either, but I go to all these meetings and all we talk about is provider rates. The providers all complain and bitch about rates. It's bitch, rate. And part of it is good because, we need to say to the state, if you're going to take care of people, you have to give an adequate amount of money so I can hire staff to do that job. And I get that on the business side. But when I go to meetings, I talk about people. The state gives me X amount of dollars an hour. I pay a staff person X amount of dollars an hour, and I take a percentage admin fee on that. And my whole model is based on having more hours because I have a small office. I don't have a big infrastructure. I don't own a bunch of properties. I don't have multiple levels of vice presidents. I don't have a company car. I don't have a membership at a golf course.
You just got Ellie's dad.
I'm just doing things for other people, and I'm now making a decent living at it. But if the key to the business is very simple, it's if we can keep a person living in their own apartment and being successful at doing that, then we fulfilled the charitable role of a 501c3 charity, which is relieving the burden of government. Because it cost me, I'll give you some keys. If I help support you living in your own apartment at 15, 20 hours a week of support, I'm going to bill about $25,000 a year for that. Now I got to pay staff, I got to pay markup, I got to pay, for those. Okay. If you live in the Whitehaven Center, a state-run institution, that's going to cost you, the taxpayer bill, $470,000 a year. Now you tell me what the only difference between. Now, I'll give you another key. If you put somebody in an apartment 24/7, it'll be half of $470,000. So I don't think for a second that, okay, the people living in their own apartments for 15 hours a week is only about $20,000 a year. And you'll say, and other people will say, oh, well, you can't take all these people out of the Whitehaven Center and have them go live in the community because they can't live on their own without 24/7 care. Well, what's the average cost of nursing home care in Pennsylvania, which is really what they're saying that it is up there, is $100,000. The average cost of living in a group home, $150,000. The average cost of Whitehaven Center, state-run institution, is $470,000. I help somebody live in their own apartment for 20 hours a week. It's $25,000. So what's the only difference between living in a state-run facility at 24/7 or living in your own apartment 24/7 at half the cost?
That's a huge gap.
It's a huge gap. What's the only difference? So I can do it for $25,000 a year. And I can demonstrate, I have two cases that I've demonstrated that we can take somebody 24/7. We have somebody in the Philadelphia region. We started remember I told you about Roxy? She was 24/7. Now she's 16 hours a week. We have somebody in the Philadelphia region. We started 24/7. We now give him 4 hours a week of support. So we can demonstrate that we can decrease the cost of services to the public, to the taxpayer, by having good outcomes, by helping people live more independently, because that's what they want. Roxy came to us and said, I don't need you overnight anymore. Well, I got news for you. I got two sides to Frank Bartoli, right? I got what we're talking about here, the dreams and the hopes and help people. I don't care if I make any money. And then I got like the business side. Well, you mean I don't need overnight care? How much money I'm going to lose if I drop 7 days a week of 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. in the morning? I'm going to lose a lot of money. But you know what? It's what's best for Roxy. So if I can demonstrate I could be successful with her, go back to the state and say, well, give me somebody else for $470,000 and I'll make it $25,000, right? I mean, that's kind of the business side of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot.
Right.
Yeah. So what else is going on with NEPA Inclusive? What else have you guys done? Anything fun recently?
Well, COVID, we'd had enough, and we're like, look, we got to get back together, and we've got to start having parties again. So we pulled our staff together for a retreat, a staff retreat.
Is that where these shirts came from? These are the retreat
where these inclusion shirts came from.
Yeah.
Yep. We said, look, we've got to get back to our basics. We got to get back to roots. Let's bring some of the people that we support, some of the people that, we send staff out and help, people with intellectual disabilities. Let's bring them out. Let's sit down and let's talk about who it is that we are, what is it that we do, how do we do it, and then let's talk about what do we want to do moving forward and how are we going to start having parties again. And that's what we did last Friday.
Nice. How'd it go?
It went better than I could have imagined. I mean, the energy behind the staff and the energy behind what we're doing is blows my mind. We've got such positive, committed, mission-driven, energized people working for us. And I think part of it is because we bring the people that we support out, and they hear from them, and they see them. I should tell you about Jeffrey as another example of success. But so we had the staff retreat. We're planning a whole lot of different parties. I mean, we're in 13 counties now. So we have the Pocono region, we have the Berks County region, we have the Lehigh Valley, we have Columbia County, and we have our traditional Luzerne, Lackawanna, Wyoming County. So we're going to do parties in all different, parts of our regions because, people can't travel that far, and then you have to be local. All politics is local, all fundraising is local, all the, what we do all has to be local. So we have to do things in our local community to get our name out there and to, have some fun with the people that we support.
What about Jeremy? Tell me about him.
Jeffrey. Jeffrey. So Jeffrey was at the retreat. That's why I thought about him. We were asked to support Jeffrey a couple years ago for 5 hours a week. He didn't have a waiver, this waiver that you get funded sources for. So we did it 5 hours a week. There's another funded source that we could use if the county gives it to us called BASE. So they said, we'll give you 5 hours a week out of BASE money. His issue was he was not remaining successful in his own apartment because he's in a HUD apartment complex, and you have to pass inspection every year in order to remain in that apartment, and he couldn't pass inspection. He would put things in front of his emergency buzzers and those types of things, So our goal was to get in there and help him clean his apartment and keep it maintained and decluttered and da-da-da. Then he got a waiver, and we were doing 20 hours a week of support with him. So he's living in his own apartment. We're doing 20 hours a week. Then he said he wanted a job, and he got a job. We helped him get a job, and then he quit his job, and he wasn't working anymore. Then he decided somehow, and I don't even remember how this started, but he wanted to start doing some social activities with other people that we support. So he's kind of like hey, look, we got to get let's get a barbecue for the people we support. So for about the last 2 years, he's been our volunteer coordinator, social planner. He plans, along with some of our staff, most of the social programs that we do. And he's always the one that kind of says to his staff, bring me down to the office. And he reminds us that we've got to start doing some activities. So Jeffrey, there's an example, he was just living in his own apartment with no support, needed some help. We gave him some help. Now he's one of our key leaders of our organization, and he's and he MCs, at some of our events and things of that nature.
Wow, that's awesome. Really talk about inclusion.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah. So what's next for you guys?
Housing. Housing is a huge, huge issue. We can probably talk about this in one whole podcast, but to summarize it, a person with an intellectual disability on Social Security disability makes about $750, $800 a month in Social Security. How do they afford an apartment? So without living in their own apartment, they're forced to remain either in a group home, at home with their families, or in low-income housing complexes, which is still a dependent class issue. About 75% of the people in America with intellectual disabilities live at home with their families. And statistics tell us that those families are aging. And so they're not going to be able to continue to care for them long-term living at home. Because like I said, there's a lot of people that say, I don't want my child to go live in a group home. I'll take care of them. But maybe I'm 75 years old now, and maybe my husband passed away a couple years ago, and my child is like 60, 65 right now. Like, what happens to these individuals? So what are we going to do as a society with the people that are going to begin to fall off with the ability to care for their adult children? There are not enough low-income housing complexes, Section 8 vouchers available for them to go live in all of those facilities, in those places. Do we want to keep forcing people that don't want to live in group homes? Now, there's a group of people that want to live in group homes, and they choose group homes, and that's fine. That's their choice, and there's a lot of good group homes out there. But there's a group that don't want to do that. And we're not going to continue to put them in the state institutions. That's a bygone era, and that's a dying dinosaur of care. So what are the options? Do we want to spend $150,000 a year in group homes, or do we want to spend less than that helping people live in their own apartments? But how do we help them live in their own apartments? Because they can't afford rent. So we have to find solutions to the issue of affordable housing for people with intellectual disabilities. And that's what our next evolution, I think, is going to be.
Do you have the solution?
We have some
part of it.
We have some movement on things that we want to do, and one of those programs we call the IRAP program, the Inclusive Rental Assistance Program. We were able to, we were successful in getting a small grant that we applied for through the Scranton Area Foundation, Robert Spitz Fund, to provide rental assistance to a limited number of people in Lackawanna County to live in their own apartments by paying partial rent for those individuals. So we would like to go with a 1/3 model, but we kind of go with a half and half right now. So basically, if the apartment's $800, we'll contribute maybe $400 and you pay $400. So if you're getting $750 or $800 in Social Security and your apartment is $800, you're now paying $400, we're paying $400. You could take the extra money from $400 to $800 and you can say, okay, now I could afford groceries, maybe to go to the movies every now and then. Maybe if I want to go somewhere and you're not around, maybe take the bus. So that's one of the solutions that we're working on. But the overall solution is going to have to be long-range ways to help people in this particular category live in affordable housing of their choosing. Remember, that's an important part. We don't necessarily want to say to people like we did 30, 40, 50 years ago, oh, we're going to build a bunch of low-income housing complexes all together, all in the same part of town, and you have to go live there. Because what does that do? That just creates more segregation. So we want them to be able to choose the apartment that they want to live in, and then we have to go negotiate with the landlord, will you accept the partial rent that we will pay, and they will pay the balance. So if we can expand that program, that would be good. But we have some other ideas that probably I don't want to discuss at this point, but we have some other ideas.
Those are top secret, huh?
They're secret, yeah.
All right, good. Well,
and they're so earth-shattering that nobody else wants to work on them. So as a charity, we might work at them. And we're finding that as we're investigating some of them, that the return on investment of those programs are significantly lower than our current model of services, and significantly lower than the other models like group homes. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of competition for how to work on them. I think it's going to be more about can we find people that want to help us do those? Like, we find the capital to invest in those? Can we find the money for the rent subsidy? And we don't really even get much of a markup on a business side on the rental assistance program, because most of the grants that you get these days, not all of them, but most of them, they'll say, look, we'd like to support this idea, but we don't want to support the administrative costs of it. So it's like, oh yeah, we'll pay for the rent, but we're not paying for the program director that's going to run it. So, it's a low margin, mission driven type initiative, but I think that's going to be one of our next things that we're going to do.
Really cool. What about our listeners? Is there any way that our listeners might be able to help you guys?
Well, certainly, going online and making a donation would help. But that's a very costly endeavor. So while we love donations, like every other nonprofit does, small donations aren't going to make a big impact on that. But certainly, any donations would be helpful.
What about how can our listeners connect with NEPA Inclusive online?
www.nepainclusive.org. Follow our Facebook page. If you go on our website, you can register for our newsletter. We'll send you our Inclusive Alert once a month. The Inclusive Alert was a newsletter that we came up with an idea that we want our newsletter to be bigger than NEPA Inclusive. It's about inclusion. Anything associated with inclusion can be on that. If you're out there and you have an idea about inclusion, you're another provider, and you have something inclusive, send it to us. We'll put it on our newsletter. We want people to find the Inclusive Alert to be something that they can find as a resource that they can find out information about inclusion. And so that's what we're trying to get to too. We have an Instagram, traditional models. Call us 570-947-NEPA, 6372, I think it is.
Nice. What about before we end? Do you have any message or anything you want to leave with the listeners?
I think one of the messages would be inclusion is cool. It seems that people with intellectual disabilities get forgotten in the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility ideas that are floating around the world today. Inclusion is good for everybody. Studies show that if you are if you're a typical student in a inclusive classroom, meaning if you're in a classroom in your high school with students with disabilities that are included in their typical classrooms, students without disabilities actually perform better in college and in life because they learn all the soft skills. They learn about diversity, they learn about those things, and they learn about empathy, and they're more successful. So I think the misnomer about people with disabilities in education is, we can't have students with disabilities in our regular classrooms. I mean, they'll be disruptive. They'll be too hard to manage. Dude, the reality is the typical students do better, right? I told you the Taryn Ashbys of the world and the Mia Barbaris. These people they're very successful because they understand. They understand that training everybody and helping other people is better for everybody. The same thing exists with the people in the community. People that live in the community that have intellectual disabilities are vibrant members of our community. We can learn from them. You'd be surprised. We brought, we have a T-shirt that we're designing. I'm not going to tell you what it is today. It's not this one that we're wearing. It's another one. But we're sitting around talking about it, and wait till we throw this out. We're not going to make a dime on this thing probably, but it's going to be one of the most fun things that we've ever done in 8 years of running this company. But so we're saying, look, we have a concept, and we're talking about what the concept is. And I looked at my staff, and I'm like, well, we have some people in our network that are artists. Why don't you go ask them to design it? They're like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that, right? So 2 days later, we had some sketches of the design that we wanted. And it was from somebody that we support. So we have somebody that we have with an intellectual disability that we support that's designing the T-shirt logo, the T-shirt design that we're going to have, and we're going to do some other creative things with it. But, people with intellectual disabilities and autism and other types of disabilities that we support or other people support or just out in your community, I mean, they're vibrant members of our community. They're people we can learn from. My daughter, she's excellent with animals. She's excellent with dogs. And if you get to know your neighbors, if you get to know people with disabilities, you'll find that they have interests, they have desires, they have unique elements of the community that can enhance, the community. And that's what inclusion is all about. So don't forget people with intellectual disabilities when you talk about, the buzzwords now: diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. People with intellectual disabilities are no different than people of different races or people of different, sexual orientations now, we're here. We've been here forever. Inclusion's cool, get to know us.
Yeah. And I want to ask you one more thing, because you touched on it a little bit, but you talked about learning lessons. Like, what lesson or lessons has Ellie taught you?
Ellie taught me, and people told me this, and when she was born, and I didn't understand it. But Ellie taught me that the world is a great place. She taught me that it's okay to be disabled. It's okay. And then I realized, and I heard from other people, and I thought about it, and now I'm getting older, I pretend I'm not, but I am. Like, we're all disabled at some point in our life. So what's the difference if I had a stroke tomorrow and now I'm disabled, or if Ellie always had an intellectual disability? I mean, there's no difference. It's just the longevity of how long you have that disability. But I think Ellie taught me that it's going to be okay.
I love it.
I've never told that to anybody else. I never actually thought about it that way before, just right now.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah. This was awesome, man. I think what you do is absolutely amazing, and keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thank you.
You're doing great things. All right. Ellie's dad, a.k.a. Frank Bartoli, NEPA Inclusive, on the Stacks podcast in the Blue Door studio. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Bill.
If you'd like to learn more about the On the Stacks podcast, be sure to search the hashtag #OnTheStacks on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave a review. We'll catch you next time on the Stacks.